Perfect. So what we're going to go over today is kind of, and we haven't had this for other projects per se, but for the Rails project, it is a pretty big project. And it is a project that has a lot more requirements than the past two that you've done, and specifically has a few complicated model relationship requirements. And so we really want to set you guys up for success going into project week next week. And so our goal of the day today is to make sure that you guys have a really solid understanding of the requirements for your project, and also a really solid idea of how you might be able to implement those requirements into your project. And so that's kind of going to be our focus for today. This is going to be a session more so, I know I ask you guys a lot of questions as I go, but it will really matter that you guys are interactive and let me know if something doesn't make sense or if you have any follow-up questions on it. Because at the end of the day, we're just trying to get you prepped for your project. If you're not at your project yet, don't fret, but this still will apply to you. So I would encourage you to kind of focus as we're going through of thinking of ideas of what you could do for your project. So right off the bat, and the way we're kind of going to compare these requirements is the project that we've been making does not yet meet all of these requirements. It meets a decent number of them, but not all of them. And so we're going to talk about like how could we refactor or change our current app so that it does meet these requirements. Whereas when you start your project, you'll be going in and knowing how it does meet the requirements before you even start, hopefully, at least. And so the first one that really throws a lot of people off is this specification of what your models need to do. So it says we need to have at least one has many, at least one belongs to, and then a has many through, these two has many through relationships. And what this part is really referring to is this next bullet point, which is that we're going to have a many-to-many relationship. And anytime you have a many-to-many relationship, it must go through a join table. And with that many-to-many relationship, our join table needs to have at least one other attribute other than the foreign keys. And so typically, what makes a join table is not like the naming of it or anything like that. What makes a join table is that we see two foreign keys, and it's connecting two models through foreign keys. And so in order to fully meet this requirement that I have highlighted right here, it would look like two foreign keys plus another attribute. So two foreign keys plus a comment attribute or something else beyond that. Now, right off the bat, and I've got it pulled up, I'm a big fan of looking at my schema to see if I've met these requirements. You could also look at your models. The reason I look at my schema is I've gotten to a point, and it might take you a little while to get there, where I've trained my brain to, like, based on looking at my foreign keys, I can understand how things are connected to each other. So based on this example right now, we didn't really start it with users in mind, which also kind of threw us off. We just added in users later. We have shoes that belong to categories. So we do have a has many and belongs to relationship here. So we have checked off this first little piece, but do we have a many to many? And what are your guys' thoughts on how we could maybe implement a many to many?
I think shoes could have many categories and categories could have many shoes.
So we could actually make a join table in between these so that, because really a shoe, fine line of it could actually fit into more than one category. Great idea. One thing to keep in mind on that, like that actually is an amazing idea, but if we added it, I think it would be a little bit difficult to do something other than just the foreign keys. So we could do like a category shoes table. And I know you're not really supposed to edit the schema. We're not keeping any of this here. I'm just doing it so we can think about it. And we would have two foreign keys of shoe ID and category ID. The hard part here is I, off the top of my head, couldn't think of a third one that would potentially make sense. And that would be what we really need to meet the requirements, is we would need one other attribute here.
like category. I guess that doesn't work.
Yeah. But this is a brainstorming session, Brandon. So great thought. It could be something we implement as a side, like you can always go above and beyond the project requirement. So we could have this join table just to like make our project a little bit more interesting. I think it might be hard to make this work with to meet this requirement though. But good idea. What other thoughts or ideas do you guys have? This is a brainstorming, so no wrong answers.
You have like a shoe review thing. So like a user would submit a review of a shoe, and then that, well, I guess, yeah, something like that.
Yeah, so as we have it set up right now, it's kind of as if like these are like a store showing them off. You know, it's not like the shoes belong to any one person. Maybe we've generated all of this with seed data. So we can like look through the different shoes or the marketplace. We could create, and this is, I like that you brought this up, Andrew, because the easiest way to meet these requirements, in my opinion, is to do something like a comment or reviews table. And the reason I say it is naturally meets the requirements is we need two pieces of information for the review. We need to know both what we're reviewing, so a shoe ID, and then we would also need to know who reviewed it, so a user ID, I can type, and then there has to be some sort of information. And it could be as simple as like a rating, like a number, or it could be a string, like a comment. And we wouldn't need both of those. We would need just at least one of those to make it work in this situation. And then you can imagine our models would end up being built out where a user has many reviews, and then a user has many shoes through reviews. So you could like see all of the shoes that a user reviewed. A user would have many, or a shoe, sorry, would have many reviews. And then you could also see all of the users who have reviewed that shoe. A big check that you need to do kind of in your own head as you're going through this is also, is it a true many to many? Because I've seen people set this up where they go, well, really, I want the same person to do all the reviews. And in that case, like a shoe wouldn't have many users. But in this case, this example, reviews would work out perfectly. And we could set that up. Any other thoughts? Because there are more than one right answer here. What are some other ways that we could adjust this to make it fit those requirements? I'm going to actually, I'll organize these notes later, but I'm going to put these in here just as notes of like a good example for a join table. Any other thoughts? Did anyone else have an idea that wasn't covered yet?
I guess another idea could be to kind of bifurcate users into, if this was to be like an e-commerce thing, it could be into buyers and sellers.
Yeah, so we could, like right now, these shoes don't have any relationship with users. We could think of it more like the shoes are being posted by users. Like I log in and I post my shoe that I want to sell. So we could do something like we could add over here, and I should be careful about writing in here because I need to not mess up my schema. But I could add in here like a user ID. And now my shoe could both belong to a category and belong to the user. And this would be like the person who's listing it for sale. And then alternatively, we now could do users has many categories through shoes and categories have many users through shoes. And that would be a good setup. The only thing we're really missing there is in the way this is written, and it's kind of hard to understand, they really want an additional has many and belongs to that isn't part of your has many through. And in that case, all of our has many's and belongs to would have to do with this through relationship. So we would want to add like something else extra as well. And it could be like anything extra, but we would want one other like has many belongs to relationship. if we did something like this, kind of to follow up on your full idea, Andrew, we could also make another table and we could call it like purchases. So we could think of like maybe our users like a Poshmark or something like that. Our users both only list stuff, but our users can also purchase things. So we could have them have two different types of relationships with shoes. And I'm going to show you how that works because I think it's the coolest thing in the world. Where we could have another join table here. But this join table is really keeping track of who is purchasing the shoe. No, this wouldn't work because our shoe can't have many purchases. This was my idea if we changed, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. This was my idea if we basically like took these pieces off and we made those a part of our purchase table, or our price a part of the purchase table. So like, or maybe we could even think of it as a bid. So you bid for your different things and then you could have a price that you're bidding for. So you could have like 10 different users bidding on a shoe and submitting different prices. The biggest thing and the main piece that I'm really trying to emphasize is this idea that we must have 2 foreign keys and another attribute for this to meet the requirements. So that's kind of like the big focus of what I'm going through there. Questions about this requirement so far?
Wait, Jen, can I make another suggestion as far as a possible relationship?
Yeah.
So shoes and reviews or purchases could be good, right? Because if a user purchases a shoe, then you could leave a review and a rating potentially. But then an easy attribute that I see here that would be easy to break out would be the brand. So then a shoe could belong to a brand and a category, and that would be the second has many through.
Yes.
A brand can have many categories of shoes through the shoes that they have.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too, and I am actually glad that you said that. Like, we could take an attribute like this, especially because brands getting repeated a lot. Like, we'll have the same Nike brand multiple times. And so in that case, it might make sense to actually, if we wanted to have another has many belongs to, we could separate out the brand and our shoe could belong to a brand. And so this, we could have a separate table that was brand. And it wouldn't have a lot of info. It could just have a name. And then our shoe could also belong to a brand ID. And then we'd get this through relationship where our brand and our categories, this looks really messy, but where our categories and our brand have a relationship through shoes. The number one check I want you to do is basically you should be writing out what you want in your database before you actually start it. But in writing it out, you want to make sure that you're going to have a place that has 2 foreign keys and another attribute. And then additionally, some other foreign key that matches. And so we could add like a 1 for our user. And then we've just got basically a huge join table, but we've got all pieces connected. In general, I will say it's a little bit easier to meet the requirements if you end up with four models like we have. It's not specified anywhere in the requirements that you must have 4 models, but it just is a little bit easier to actually end up at the required relationships if you have 4 models. If you don't have 4 models, you probably, and I know I've shared this before because it is my favorite resource in the world, you probably will need to set up more, set up aliases for your relationship. And if you're curious as to what that is, it doesn't really apply to everyone, so I don't feel the need to like go through it in depth, but it's something you can come to any office hours and I'd be happy to talk to you about. But it's the idea of we could have 3 tables, but we could have different relationships. So our user could have many shoes that they've purchased, and then our user could have many shoes that they have listed for sale. So we can get an extra relationship without having an extra table. But like I said, it might not apply to everyone's project. So that's going to be something I'll leave for come ask us at office hours, and I'd be happy to go over that with you. Any other questions before I move on? If we have time, we're going to come back to it at the end, but because I think this is the most important piece, but I just want to make sure no immediate questions before I move forward. Nope. Okay. This next one says your model must include reasonable validations for simple attributes. Does this project that we've created, do we meet this requirement? What do y'all think? Oh, my chat's not open anymore. Got a yes from Brandon. Thank you, Brandon and Thelbert for participating. I would say yes. We probably could add some, oh, we do have one here. I was gonna say probably every model is gonna have at least a presence of something required. You never wanna be able to make a completely blank model, full model, but to at least have some presence of, and then the other one that's super required is your validates uniqueness of whatever your login attribute is gonna be. And so we have met that one. I think this one's pretty straightforward because it was also a requirement in Sinatra. I'm gonna skip down because I think the one that goes with that, and I don't know why it's so far down, is your form should correctly display validation errors. Specifically, it should be enclosed with a field with errors class and error messages describing the validation failures. Have we met that requirement? And if the answer is yes, I want you guys to unmute yourself and tell me how we implemented this requirement.
I feel like we did that inside the view file with the full message, full messages, and I want to say like over. Can I mark it or something?
Sure.
Let me see where you are. Like, yeah, I pretty much see this. There's something in the way. Hold on. Okay, I want to say like, well, we did this here, and then we included that, so this can print out the message.
Yeah, exactly. This, and if you remember, this code I just drag and dropped from the active record validations. Okay, I didn't actually even write this myself. I just changed this to work with a partial. If you can get this partial set up and you put this on every single form, you are good to go on that requirement for part B. Okay, so this matches part B. It displays the errors. I don't know if you guys remember or not, has part A been happening?
I believe
That already happened one time. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I already said my part.
You guys are both right. It has been happening, and it happens automatically. We didn't really add anything for it to happen. Do you guys know why it happens automatically, or what other code is making it happen automatically?
This is just a guess, but is it the div ID? Is it something in the styling of the div? The error execution?
It actually isn't with that, but that is a good guess. It is purely because we are using either form for or form with. Both of them will automatically do it. Yeah, Kevin. The form helpers have code built in that if this object being passed back to the form has errors, it will add divs that say fields with errors. And so as long as you're using a form for or a form with, and the other really super important part is that we re-render when something doesn't work. So like here in our create, if it doesn't save, we render. This part, like the fact that we're actually re-rendering, is going to allow us to get those fields with errors. If we rely solely on flash messages, we'll never get those fields with errors because it won't pre-populate back in the object with errors. You can still grab the errors here, but you won't get those fields with errors. So it is important. Not all of your error messages have to be a render. A lot of times actually for a login, I redirect. But most of them where they're filling out a form should be a re-render, because then you get the object and whatever attributes were correct, plus error messages for whichever ones weren't. Just as a reminder, I did go in and I stole this code from my validation, active record validations guide. And I could even have div here or something like that. But so I did add this code field with errors. And yes, a thief. I'm borrowing well from documentation. And so as you notice, as we were going through, we saw red backgrounds pop up when something went wrong. So this is a good way to double check that you've met that requirement. Another good way is just to inspect the page when you've submitted a form and it doesn't go through, and make sure you get those fields with errors coming through. So you'll never actually write out div field with errors. It'll happen automatically if you're using Form 4 and re-rendering on a bad submission. Okay, doing pretty well so far. It's really only the first one we're missing. You must include at least one class level active record scope method. Do we have a scope method? Anyone remember?
I believe we do. Can you go to the model for a moment?
And that is where our scope methods would live. So good job directing us there.
Yep.
And we do, and it looks so I'm sorry I keep all of these commented out things. I just wanted to show the example of the other one to do. But actually, since we're not on scope anymore, you can go back to that branch and take a look at it. We do have some scope methods. And what it's looking for here is what I was trying to specifically say. It's looking for us last time it's looking for an active record relation to be returned. So even though we could have done these same things with Ruby code and use sort by, that would not fulfill the requirement because we would not have a chainable scope method. These two can be chained onto each other, and we can say shoe.order by price .new shoes. If order by price was Ruby code, this would break. And so that's kind of, you only have to write one. I usually recommend writing two just so you can test out in your console that they both are chainable, and they really should be chainable either way. And that's a good check to make sure you've done it correctly. For scope methods, I know I sent you guys some, information on it, and then there's some of it linked here as well. It can be written out as a class method if you want, as long as we are using query terms. So like .where, .order, .group, any of those terms, not Ruby terms. If you have any questions about this is where I would go back to the model class methods lab, where they gave you a bunch of examples of like boats and ways to organize them and query them. Those are really good examples of active record scope methods written out as class methods. Thank you, Brandon. Is that the document I shared last time? I think so too, just by looking at the name of it. Yes. I would also practice these because a lot of times, and not always, you might get a live coding challenge that has you add one of these in. And yes, Jesse, sorry, I was thinking of two things at once. Yes, you can write it like this, or you can write it as scope. In my opinion, there might be a few Rails reviewers that are like picky, but they are doing the same thing. Even the like documentation says you can do it either way. So I say yes. It's just probably more common conventionally to write them like this because they're shorter and take up less room. And you don't want your model to be too crowded. But going back to what I was saying, sometimes you'll get requests to do live coding challenges with scope methods. And I just want to kind of give you a higher level way of approaching those. When someone is giving you a code challenge with a scope method, usually what they're looking for is they want you to make a new route. So I might say, we already have most expensive, but I might say, can you make a URL that is called / like, I don't know, dark colors or something like that. Or we could, and it's going to have any of the blues, any of the purples, any of the blacks, like any of those colors, and you need to do a scope method to display it or something like that. What they're really looking for is they're looking to make sure that you understand how to make a custom route, how to set up your route in the controller, like how to give an action for it, and how to connect it to a view. And then they want you to know that your scope method would go in the model. But I say that because a lot of times people will get a little thrown off by the scope method, and they'll be like, that sounds really hard. I don't know how to do the scope method. And they'll freak out and not do any of the pieces that they do know how to do. So if you get a coding challenge that will require you to write a scope method and you're unsure about that piece, do it last and set up all of your other portions first. Maybe even, I don't know, I know the Rails ones can be a little intimidating. Chris, we can talk about this later, but I just had a thought of maybe next Friday when I'm doing office hours, we can do one office hours that's like a practice coding challenge, because I think those can be intimidating. But anyways, so this is where your scope methods will go. If you look at the spec file, which you can get from GitHub, I should have already had this open. It's going to say something like you must have a custom route to match your scope method. They don't actually really check for that. Our spec probably needs to be updated. But like I said, you might have a live coding challenge that makes you write a custom route to match your scope method. So it wouldn't be a bad practice to go ahead and have this done. So this is what I'm referring to here. Include a class level active record scope method, and then also include a URL to see the working feature. What they're really saying is include a scope method and use your scope method. Don't just write a scope method. So we've fulfilled that because we are using these. We've also truly fulfilled it because we have this custom route called most expensive. Where is it? Right here. So it is good practice, I would say, to write something like this out, just so you have the example of it, but it's not necessary for sure. Like you don't actually have to include that as long as you have a scope method that you're using. Hope I didn't confuse you more. Are we good on that requirement? We can come back to it if we need to too. Cool. Your application must provide standard user authentication, sign up, login, log out, and passwords. So it's still anything you did in Sinatra with bcrypt has secure password. That should be included here too. We don't ever store raw string passwords in our database. And we should have a session that stores the fact that we have signed up or logged in. And so pretty standard for this. The next piece is we need some third-party authentication. This is the OAuth that we did yesterday. And so we did Google. You can use any of those things that they list there, GitHub or Facebook. I think you have a lab that does GitHub if you want to like use that as an example. You only need one. You just need that ability to log in. And then in general, you should always be following RESTful URL conventions. But you also need to have a nested route that follows RESTful URL conventions. We did meet this the other day when we did our shoes, where we have our nested route of our index, new, and create. I am aware that it says you can include a nested index or show. Personally, for your own growth and like for you to make the most use of your nested route, I would highly encourage you to make it a nested index route. Like we talked about the other day, this one just usually shows more information. And then a nested new route that relates to its parent's resource. It doesn't specify that here, but I believe, let me actually double check this. Oh, no, it doesn't specify in either spot. What I was gonna say is it used to say that you have to have the route that's both nested and unnested. So I should be able to go to /shoes and categories /1/shoes. It doesn't say that, so you just need the nested route. You don't have to do both. I think it's a little bit more impressive if you kind of like want to show off what you've learned to make it so it does both. Otherwise, you just don't have as much logic in your controller of handling both of those. But it is not necessarily listed as a requirement, so good to know. And then kind of our final one, this one is a little bit up in the air, but you must, your application should be fairly dry. So as you've gone through the curriculum, you've seen before actions, and we actually don't have any of those in here. But it would be a best practice to have a before action for any code that's repetitive. And it would also be a good idea to have before actions for like checking if people are allowed to visit that route, like before action for authenticated. You should be using partials and helpers when they're appropriate. So you don't need like 10 partials, but you probably should have a main partial for your form because that's going to be repetitive, or something of that nature. And then a few, at least one or two, I would encourage you to try to have something here in your application helper just so you can prove that you can do it. And in general, the best test is to go through your views and just make sure you don't have too much logic in here. So I would look through my views and check to see where I have if, else, end, and I have that here. So this would probably be a place I'd want to refactor. This refactoring should be done last. And so you can still build it out without having these refactors, and then at the end go through. And I shouldn't speak for Chris, but I know I've told a lot of my students, if you finish and you want to send it to me and ask for advice on it, I'd be happy to maybe point out areas that you could refactor. So if you want to make it first and then just ask for that.
Same for me.
Yeah. So those are kind of the big project requirements. We've got a few other things that I want to talk about, but I first want to make sure any questions that you guys have encountered, anyone who's started their project or has looked at this so far.
Yeah, when I took a look at it, it's talked about something about include device. Like, for example, go into the Rails assessment GitHub. Yeah. Right. That next line includes sign up.
Yeah, actually, it's interesting you say that because I talked to my manager yesterday about if we can remove that. It's giving you an example. Devise is a gem that I would only recommend using if you really are great at reading documentation. It is a gem that handles the entire sign up, login, authentication process for you, generates all of the views, all of the logic. It seems like a big shortcut, and we kind of debated if I was going to show you guys how to use it or not. We decided on no, because it seems like a huge shortcut, but I feel like if you go into it saying, I'm going to use Devise because it's a shortcut, it usually ends up being a headache because it's actually, it's not hard to use, but it relies on you understanding the documentation, because when you use Devise, you end up you don't get access to see the controller or the views that Devise has created. And so it can be really frustrating if something goes wrong to understand how to debug it, unless you're confident in reading documentation, because it is a well-documented gem. And so if you are kind of ahead of the game and have a little bit of extra time, it's something I would encourage you to look into because it's a really cool gem. And if you're in that boat, where maybe you're going to get a jump start on your project this week, go ahead and check it out. If you are not going to start your project until like Monday, which is totally fine, I would recommend don't even look at Devise, just do it how you know, instead of having to learn like a new way of implementing it. So you don't have to use Devise is really the answer. They just gave it as an example there. But you can use Devise. It's not, just make sure you understand how it works is really what I'm getting at. Good question though, Ms. Albert. Any other big questions here? Okay. So the next thing that I wanted to show you guys is, and I don't think Anthony is in here. I know he posted his Sinatra project to Heroku. I don't know if any of the rest of you guys did, but Heroku is a place where instead of you visiting your site using localhost, you actually have a website URL. So you could send it to your friends and family that don't have access to your local computer for them to use your application. Pretty cool. One thing about Heroku is it does require that you have a database set up in Postgres. If you have already started your project and you started your project with SQLite, not to worry. I have done that many times, and I have switched my database over to Postgres when I'm ready to post it to Heroku. And I brought up Anthony's name because I know he did that for Sinatra, so he's like a good resource if you're going to do that for Rails. I also have some blogs of how to switch it if you've already done it. But since a lot of you guys on here probably have not already done it, you probably haven't started your project yet, the piece that I wanted to go over is how do we start our project on Postgres so that we don't have the annoying process of trying to switch it. And the link that I just sent out right now is how to switch it. So we've been setting up all of these database-wise. We look at our, I'm gonna like close all of these. If we look at our database file, you'll see that all of this is set up to deal with SQLite. And we've been including SQLite in our gem file. If you're going to use Postgres, the first thing you're going to have to do is install it on your machine. I'm going to send out I've got a lot of links. So here's the Postgres site. It is a little bit different, I believe, with Windows, and I found a good tutorial that talks about how to do it on different, like if you're on Ubuntu, if you're on Windows, if you're on any of those, because I don't have experience with any of those. But basically, the first thing you would need to do is install your Postgres app. You can install it following these steps if you are on a Mac. And end up this is the hardest part, is because I haven't actually done this in a really long time, but I do have Postgres set up on my computer. One of the ways that you'll know that it's set up, if you're on a Mac, I don't know how it looks for Windows, is up here at the top, you'll see this little elephant guy. And you'll see that I have Postgres and I have Postgres running. So I have initialized Postgres. And so this elephant guy is kind of your key of like, is Postgres working in the background? But you can pretty much just follow these instructions on this page that I sent you if you have a Mac. The other instructions were if you have not a Mac, to get this set up. Once Postgres is set up, we can use our similar Rails new command that we've been using. Let me get out of this folder. We can use Rails new, and then we can put an app name. So like, I don't know, my Rails project. You should probably name it whatever you actually want your project to be when you initialize this. Don't name it like my Rails project, name it what it's gonna be. And then we're gonna specify the database that we're gonna use. So it will look a little bit like we do this little flag that says database, and we set it equal to PostgreSQL. And it will generate an application just like it has when we originally used Rails new. The biggest difference, and we'll see it once it finishes bundling installing, is that this file will be different, and all of these will point to a Postgres adapter. I have many times before, so if you have already started yours, I have many times before gone through the steps of just changing my production to Postgres and leaving all of my other ones as SQLite. We can go through how to do that as well, because I have gone through the headache of posting my apps to Heroku, having to switch them, not just starting with Postgres. Okay, and so let's take a look at what we just made, my Rails project, just so I can show you the difference here. Oh, and this is kind of nice. It looks like it even goes through some of the install Postgres in case you didn't have Postgres installed. I didn't know it did that. Those do look like all of the instructions that you would need to make this set up. That's kind of cool. But as you can see inside of here, we now have a different adapter that is specified. In general, we now are going to be using Postgres instead of SQLite. It's still, you shouldn't have anything that's different as you work through it. You'll still do rake db migrate the same. We are just using a different software to maintain our database than we were previously, and this will make it a lot easier to host it in the end. Chris, it really has been a while since I've put Postgres on my machine. Do you have any hints or tips or tricks or any issues people might run into while trying to install Postgres?
The only thing a couple things that I've had students run into in the past is if you are not on a Mac specifically, if you are not like the chief owner of the account, like if you're using like as a guest or like as a non-admin, sometimes you run into trouble. To be honest, every time that students have run into trouble with Postgres, it usually is like a little bit of a different thing. So usually I feel like it runs really seamlessly, or you hit a stumbling block along the way, and in that case, just reach out to one of us, and it'll just take some like closer evaluation to see what exactly is going on. Sometimes it can be confusing on how to initialize, or if you've had Postgres in the past. I don't know, but generally, I mean, I've helped 3 or 4 students put it on their computers in the past week, and none of them had any problems. So, cool. Yeah.
I'll also emphasize this is not a requirement. We just are kind of doing it as a foresight because it will help you. At some point down the road, you're going to want to have yours as a website link that you can share with a friend. And so this will help you achieve that step down the road. But if you're having trouble with it, it's always something you can go back and do later. So don't let installing Postgres prevent you from completing your Rails project, because you can still do it on SQLite, and like down the road, we can work with you to like make Postgres work on your computer. It's just easier if you can get it started that way. But just don't let it hold you up. It's my big thing. Cool. So that looks good. So the last piece that I want to go over, and we'll get out of here maybe even a little early, is we talked about it once, but it is the hardest part of the project, is setting up these relationships. So I kind of wanted to do just an example of, I've got a project idea here for you, and I want you guys to help me think about what would it look like if I turned this into, a model relationship that really fit with the requirements of this project. And let me make this bigger so we can all see it. And we're gonna do like we'll draw them out on here. So we're gonna use our draw tools. And I would recommend, as you get started, you should draw yours out. Draw.io is a really great site. I cannot use computer drawing things, so I draw mine out by hand. But you should always map out your relationships before you get started, because I think it really helps you to visually see how they're connected. So my challenge is, someone had this idea, like, I want to make a place where people can write out like their wish list that they'll share with friends and family, so that people know what to like buy them as presents. And this could be a wish list for Christmas, a wish list for their birthday, a wish list for Hanukkah, a wish list for like maybe a housewarming or like a baby shower. And so the idea is you could have multiple wish lists going, and you could share them with friends and family. You can add items to your wish list. So let's brainstorm. What are some models that we could have here? Keeping in mind that we want to meet the has many through with our join table having an extra attribute.
I guess, like, for example, if you're doing a wish list, there's things that you want to wish for, right? So there's probably certain products or items. So you're probably going to need items to work with.
So we've got some good things so far. So I saw Lucy put in the chat, we're probably going to need a user. And we also, as Nathalbert said, we probably will need some items. We're also probably going to need a wish list, because that's kind of the name of this. Okay, that's looking pretty good so far. Anything jumping out to you so far that, or kind of what are some attributes, or how are we going to set up these relationships between the other? And I know I see some ideas in here. So Lucy said users have many items through wish lists. So that is telling me right off the bat that our wish list needs to belong to someone. So I'm going to say that this belongs to, and I'm going to write them out instead of doing the foreign keys for our relationships, but basically that our wish list needs to belong to our user. And our wish list also probably should have many items, right? Because you wouldn't just have one item on the wish list. A join to connect users with wish lists. What do you mean by that, Jesse?
So going along with the comment right above mine, some kind of like friends or family, like a friendship join table that connects a user to a wish list. So you can have many users connected to a wish list. So they can see the same thing.
I see. So kind of like a relationship table where it's like this user could be the owner of the wish list, but other people could be buying items off of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like that. So we'll have another join. And we might, and this would be like the kind of complicated because we would need multiple, what am I trying to think of? We would need that to use that resource that I sent you out where we like write out our relationships in more than one way, which is totally fine. But so we can do a, what would I even want to call this? I know we can call everything like wish lists. I'm just a really big fan of not calling my things like that. I try to make them something that makes sense to me. Maybe like,
maybe you could have like a guest. Well, no, I guess a user could be.
Because a user could both buy things for other people and put their own wish list there.
So we could have this be maybe purchases. Like the user are purchasing things for a wish list, or
I'm gonna
better.
Yeah. So we can call it reservations or purchases, one of those things where, and I'll make it all caps like our other ones, where what we're gonna do is this is gonna serve as our join table that connects us for like a guest. So it'll still be a user ID, so belongs to user. So it's like I would come in and see that you put that teapot on your wish list, and I'm going to reserve it so no one else can buy it. So we would also want to select an item. And so we could do a relationship this way. We could also, well, I'll leave it like that for now because we want to make sure we meet the requirements, but we can come back to that. We're getting a little closer. So to kind of finish this up, if a wish list has many items, our item would also need to belong to a wish list. And there are a lot of different ways that we could be thinking about this, because honestly, we could have a join table between wish list and item, where like an item is on many wish lists and a wish list has many items. You can kind of think about that how you want to, but for right now, we'll leave it like this. What else do we need here? So our user, we can see it would need to have many reservations. We would also want that same thing for our item. And this is like, I go ahead and put these in anytime we've talked about a belongs to. I just want to go ahead and make sure we have the matching relationship there. So we also said belongs to user, which means we should also say has many wish lists here. Okay, we're making some progress. We're not totally there yet. We only really have one join table in this relationship, right? And that would be our reservation. Can anyone think of what would be another attribute we could add to that table? Because at the moment, this doesn't meet the requirements. Nothing.
You could have
I have
like
ideas.
an
But
expiration on the reservation, maybe. Like it can only be there for so long.
yeah, perfect. Anything extra that a user can add in, And actually maybe an expiration wouldn't be a user could add it in. We would put that in the back end. But maybe like, and I don't know if you guys have used those registry sites, but a lot of times when you use them, you reserve something and then you can go back and like change the status to purchased. So we could even have like, it could be say status, or it could be an attribute that says like purchased and be a Boolean value that our user can switch from true to false. So that we like have an idea of, and it could work with what you were saying, Nelson, of we could have a built-in, if it doesn't get checked to purchased in a certain time period, then it expires and we delete that reservation, or something of that nature. I like it. So now that we've added a third attribute, and just keep in mind it should be an attribute our user can affect. So our user could change the status of them purchasing this item. Once we have that, we now can use this as our join table that gives us that many to many. So I said our user has many reservations. I can now also say they have many items through reservations. And one thing I like to emphasize with these through relationships is you can only go through something if that relationship is already established. So the order does matter. We must have a reservation before we can go through a reservation. And then we can also say we have many, oh, I'm putting this on the wrong side. Over here, we want to say we have many users. We're going to run out of room through reservations.
I wonder if we want to do an alias maybe, because it occurs to me that users have many items through reservations and they also have many items through wish lists, but like it's users in different roles.
Good call. That's what I was about to bring up. So this goes back to that, the thing that I mentioned to you guys in that first document I sent out of active record relationships. This will break. Well, it actually won't break. It just will only one of these applies, and I've done this test so many times and I actually forget which one is the one that applies, but has many items, even though they're through different things, we can't define, like has many items is defining a method called items equals and a read method for items. And so we can't list the same thing twice. And so if we want this to happen twice, we would have to alias one of these and we would have to name it something different. So we could call it, oh, it's not going to let me edit this, is it? So we could call it like has many wished items or wants or something like that. You can kind of decide how you want to call it through wish lists. And then the code looks something like we specify the source. So I would say source is items. And so that would take place of our other code. I don't know if I have a delete. I have an erase. Oh no, I erased the wrong one. But what I was trying to add in is basically this idea that we can rename that relationship. Let me do it one more time really quick. We got time. As many items, as many. I'm going to call it has many wants. Why not? Through wish lists, source items. And my syntax might be a tiny bit off, but I know it's kind of in the right idea. And what we're basically saying here is this idea of we have something through wish lists. And so it doesn't know what wants is automatically because there's no relationship here that says wants. And so we give it a source to tell it which relationship that we've established over here, what relationship means wants. And so even though this says has many wants, if I was to do user.wants, I would get back an active record association of all of the items they've put on their wish list. And so it's just like a way of renaming something. And the way the source works is basically our source is give me a relationship that's already established on our wish list table and or on our wish list model, and that's what I'll use. Speaking of all of these drawings that we have here, let's kind of add some arrows. Undo far enough. to kind of draw out our relationships. So Brandon, that would be equivalent to user.wishlist.items. In a way, we can't call user.wishlist.items because we can't call .items on an array or on an association. It would be equivalent to user.wishlist.collect, and then collecting all of each wish list items and then like flattening it. So it'd be like we would have to iterate through all of the user's wish lists and grab these 5 items, those 10 items, these 2 items for each one, and that's what the has many wants would be equivalent to. So if we kind of look at how this draws out, my user has many reservations. My user also has many wish lists. My item belongs to a wish list, and so we'll draw our arrow that way. Our item also has many reservations. And then we can kind of see, okay, because both of those arrows point there, we can make this can be a through. And we can also go through this way. It just is important to know that this through is not a many to many. This through is like a one directional through. We could rewrite it and do some different things to make it a many to many. I mean, we couldn't really do it on the wish list side, but we could change some things up. So really just a thought experiment, because I think this is the hardest piece. What I really want to prove to you is almost any idea that you have, you can make fit these requirements. Some things are just easier than others. If you're stumped on what to do for your project, anything that is a site that is going to be reviewing something or adding comments, very easy to make a join table that meets the requirements. You do not have to do that, but if you have no idea, try to think of something that you would like to make a site where people could review. You know, maybe they review their favorite beaches, or they review their favorite coffee shops, or something of that nature. Any final questions before we go?
Quick question. You mentioned about the SQLite 3. That is not supported by Heroku, and that's why we would want to move into Postgres in order to upload it. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, cool. And then at the same time, too, the project is solely related on like, how does it call it? Content management system, like a CMS kind of thing. Is that what it's supposed to be? Also, like,
it doesn't have to be. So we are still going to have users. And anything that was kind of required in Sinatra you want here. So like if my user owns a wish list, I shouldn't have a different user edit my wish list. It doesn't say that in the requirements, but the idea is you've done it in Sinatra, this is a step up. So like anything you've done in Sinatra that makes sense for your project, you should probably do here. But it doesn't have to be a content management system. It just needs to have like a join table. It might naturally like flow that your user is going to have many of something because you have users. And so in some way they would have some content, but it can be a little bit more, I don't know. It is kind of a content management system, but it doesn't have to be exactly that. Great question. Okay. Any last ones?
Well, one quick announcement that I have, and Jen, I don't know if you saw this, but Cernan, our boss, just slacked out that Avi is hosting a Rails project build today at 7 p.m. So
7 p.m. Eastern?
7 p.m. Eastern time, yeah. So we can slack that out if anyone wants to watch Avi build a Rails app.
Very cool. Thanks, Chris. Awesome. Thanks, guys, for being here. As always, if you have any other questions, let us know. Next week will be project week, so the schedule will be a bit different, and Chris and I will send that out later this week, probably tomorrow. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.